So, Elizabeth Warren is running for president. Not officially. She set up an exploratory committee and she's put out an ad. I'm going to show you some of it and talk about it and show you some clips where I think she's very strong and others where I see a weakness.
Promise of America. A promise that should be true for everyone. Growing up in Oklahoma, that promise came through for me and my family. After my older brothers joined the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack and couldn't work. My mom found a minimum wage job at Sears, and that job saved our house and our family. My daddy ended up as a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, and a senator. We got a real opportunity to build something. Working families today face a lot tougher path than my family did. And families of color face a path that is steeper and rockier, a path made even harder by the impact of generations of discrimination. I've spent my career getting to the bottom.
So, the first part of her ad is talking about her personal life, her childhood. It's like, you really don't need that in a campaign ad. I mean, sure, it may be an interesting story, but it's not necessary. She should start where she points out that graph that shows that economic inequality between race and the gap between the rich and the poor. I think that's where the ad should start. Leave out the personal life and your family. I mean, no one cares. I mean, it's interesting, but no one really cares. I mean,
Big corporations decided they wanted more of the pie, and they enlisted politicians to cut them a fatter slice. They crippled unions so no one could stop them.
We're going to turn the bull loose.
Dismantled the financial rules meant to keep us safe after the Great Depression, and cut their own taxes so they paid less than their secretaries and janitors.
It's time to write the rules for the middle class.
After Wall Street crashed our economy in 2008, I left the classroom to go to Washington and confront the broken system head on.
Elizabeth Warren, apparently not afraid to tangle with Wall Street.
Elizabeth Warren is heading into the lion's den.
Mrs. Warren goes to Washington.
She did.
We created America's first consumer watchdog to hold the big banks accountable.
A woman who has warned of another meltdown if Washington doesn't straighten up.
I never thought I'd run for office, not in a million years. But when Republican senators tried to sabotage the reforms and run me out of town, I went back to Massachusetts and ran against one of them. And I beat him.
And we are going to turn Washington back to the people.
so I like that part of the ad. I think it's incredible. I mean, okay, so I said no personal life stuff, but that is showcasing her accomplishments as a public figure and, why people should vote for her. And it basically shows that she's there fighting for you. I also like how she does a little history lesson in showing when she talks about unions being crippled. She shows Ronald Reagan, the union buster, and then shows Bush signing tax cuts. When she talks about financial deregulation, she shows clips of, I assume those were senators during the 90s. What she should have shown was Bill Clinton signing Gramm-Leach Bliley. But she's a Democrat, and one of her weaknesses, which I'll get to later, is her recent failure to call out Democrats. Now, she did when Obama was trying to appoint bankers into his cabinet, but ever since Trump, she's gone a little soft. So now, I want to show you some clips of where I think she's strong, and some clips of things I find to be weaknesses, and yada yada yada. First, I'm going to tell you what I like about her. She's a progressive, not as progressive as Bernie Sanders, but she's a really good progressive. The second most in the Senate. So take that for granted with a grain of salt. she created the Consumer Financing Protection Bureau, which returned $12 billion to defrauded Americans. You think Trump is going to do that? No, he's helping the fraudsters. She supported Medicare for All, though some progressives have pointed out that she's taken some baby steps back in March. I hope she becomes full left-wing. She recently proposed an anti-corruption measure, which I think she should have named the Drain the Swamp Act, to get old Trumpy pants and to sign it. But all in all, I like those aspects of her. What I don't like is her tendency to vote for military spending if education and healthcare spending is attached. So the most recent defense bill, which was like $674 billion to defense, and this was voted by every single Democrat, against by 6 Republicans, and Bernie Sanders, independent. As all those anti-Bernie folks is like, whose main argument against Bernie is, oh, he's not a Democrat. Well, he voted against it, so they want to claim him now. So I didn't like that she voted for it, but I also understand that the sneaky-ass Republicans attached healthcare spending and education spending. So you can look at it 2 ways. Elizabeth Warren voted to increase the military budget, or Bernie Sanders voted against education and healthcare spending. It depends on who's talking about it and how it's spun. I liked how David Pakman covered it, where he addressed, hey, look, Bernie Sanders was the only Democrat who voted against this giant military increase, but at the same time, he also voted against spending on education. So it all depends on consistency, whereas, Bernie Sanders can say, hey, look, I had voted this many times for education spending. Elizabeth Warren can do the same. I had voted this many times voted against military spending, but it's a sticky situation. Another thing that sort of disappointed me about her, which didn't in 2016, because in 2016 I thought Bernie Sanders was a nut. Free college, that's too expensive. Then I came around in 2017, realized, yeah, the rich have rigged the game. And so when she didn't endorse Bernie during the primary, she stayed out of it, which I'm going to show you a clip of her response to that and react to it. But she waited till it was over and then came and endorsed Hillary Clinton, which, I don't think I think since she won the primary, not fairly, it was rigged, the party should rally behind the winner. And I think if she were to throw a fuss, that could have further divided Democrats and made it much more easier for the idiot-in-chief to win. So that's where I was disappointed. What I'm disappointed about now, not back then, of course. Another disappointment is her failure to call out corruption within her own party, as I mentioned earlier. And her softness on issues when she's on television, and her listening to consultants. I think if she were to really put her head in the game and go with her gut and not with what her consultants say, she could be an extremely strong candidate. But I think her listening to consultants, I think it's weakness. Like when she said, oh, the primary was rigged, and then a few days later, it's like, well, it wasn't fair, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't necessarily rigged. Yeah. So I'm going to show you her basically response to the concern that she did not endorse Bernie during the primary. That's the first video clip I'm going to play.
Most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders. Yeah. So a natural question is, why not back him during the 2016 primaries if you two are the closest aligned in policy?
So look, I think that our primary, I thought was a good thing. And I thought it was good that Bernie was out there, that Hillary was out there. They were giving two different visions. They were out there through all the states. I thought it put both energy on our side. I'll tell you something else I thought it did. It made me proud to be a Democrat. While the Republicans were doing their clown car thing, with who was going to be voted off the island, and then of course ended up with a reality star as their standard bearer. I was proud of what Democrats were out there talking about. I thought it was the right thing to do. And in the end, when it was time, I went out there and fought once it was resolved to try to get Hillary elected, and I would have done the same for Bernie, no doubt about it.
Do you get why some progressives are still mad about that? That Massachusetts was decided by 1.3 points, Iowa was decided by 0.3, that perhaps he could have helped him put him over the top, and then he would have won Iowa, New Hampshire, Massachusetts.
And there are people who see it the other way.
Yeah.
For me, I think about it this way. There is nothing the Republicans would love better than for us to stand around and shoot at each other over and relitigate what happened in 2016. I look at what's happening in Washington right now. I look at what Donald Trump wants to do on health care and the Republican majority in Congress wants to do. I look at this new budget they've put out. I look at what's happening right now in the connections with Russia. And I say, God, we got to get focused here. And we got to focus on what Donald Trump is going to do in the next 24 hours, the next week, the next month. That's where we need our energy.
I also understand that, but...
So her answer was basically like a non-answer. Well, and I think it's a weakness she has when it comes to responding to the tough questions like that. But in the end, from what I make of reasoning, I'm not going to hold that against her. I mean, some of these Bernie or Buzz people are like, oh, she did not endorse Bernie Sanders. Therefore, I'm not voting for her under any circumstance. Are you kidding me? I mean, if Bernie doesn't run, she's one of the closest things we got to a Bernie Sanders. I mean, sure, Ro Khanna, AOC, and Tulsi Gabbard are probably closer. But at the same time, none of them really have any presidential ambitions. And I mean, so Elizabeth Warren is the closest she got to a Bernie Sanders. So I'd support her if Bernie doesn't run. I'll go out and vote for her in the primary if Bernie doesn't run. And if she wins the general election fairly, not in a rigged game like Hillary Clinton, though, knowing the Democratic establishment and her going after Obama for TPP, going after Obama for trying to appoint a Wall Street banker to his administration, I don't think that the NC is going to rig a primary in her favor anytime soon. They'll rig it for Kamala Harris, who let the foreclosure king off the hook. The foreclosure king being Steve Mnuchin. They'll rig it for Farmer Bro Cory Booker, Joe Biden, if he stays in until primary season, or Kirsten Gillibrand, Amy Klobuchar, though I don't think they really have any strong support I see a lot of people going, I'm never voting for Kirsten Gillibrand because of what she did to Al Franken. Which, I don't like Gillibrand. She's Hillary Clinton light. But at the same time, I want an answer in the comment section. Were the allegations of sexual misconduct against Al Franken proven or disproven? Because if people are pouting about allegations that were never disproven, it's why? But if they were ended up being disproven and Franken's innocent, I get that. But if Franken hasn't been exonerated or anything like that, let's prove these allegations before we start going after Gillibrand for forcing Franken to resign. But, and also looking back at 2016, even as a libertarian, I thought the Republican primary was a gigantic mess. Yes. And so when she says clown car who gets, yeah, that's basically what I saw. Like, the Democratic primary looks a lot more civil. I mean, Hillary Clinton did get bitchy during the debates. I watched one where she's like, I am not going to tolerate these artful smears from Bernie Sanders. It's like, not necessarily artful smears. You're the Goldman girl. But it's a non-answer, basically. She didn't want to create the same kind of mess that we had with the Republican primary, if you can remember. Where I'm going, Donald Trump is a failure and a fraud. An endorsement from Donald Trump is just as useless as a scholarship for Trump University, or like, what's degree from Trump University. And then Trump's like, Mitt was begging like a dog for my endorsement. And if I say, Mitt, talk to your knees, he'll do it. So, I mean, I get that. She didn't want to create the mess. It's like George W. Bush is like, I ain't back effing voting for Ted Cruz. It was a mess. I mean, I agree with her that the Republican primary was a mess, but that isn't really a reason to go. And I'm gonna see who wins. So now I'm gonna show you a clip of her strength. It's also from that same TYT interview. But first, this is what Jen had to say about Warren not endorsing Sanders.
Folks say, well, she should have supported Bernie Sanders last time around in 2016. Well, you're right. She should have. And I told her that when she was here in the studio. And she's at least partly acknowledged that. But that's done. She can't undo it. Okay. I wish she had as well. But would it have made the difference? We'll never know. But for now, she's in the race and she's deeply progressive. And when you have good options, take them. Okay, just because you like Elizabeth Warren doesn't mean you don't like Bernie Sanders, or vice versa. You're allowed to like both of them a lot, especially compared to the others.
I'm more open-minded than a lot of other progressives on this issue, because I honestly wouldn't fault him if he just stayed out of the primary. Like, a lot of people are super pissed at Elizabeth Warren because she didn't back Bernie. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have preferred that she backed Bernie in the primary, but ultimately, if she had just stayed out of it, which she did, okay, I'm not going to, like, that's an acceptable thing. Again, not the right thing. It's Machiavellian politics and all that, but it is acceptable. What is not acceptable is I'm going to actively pick Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders because she's doing it for careerist reasons. And
so I agree with Jenk and Kyle. I mean, Elizabeth Warren did not actively pick Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. She said she stayed out of it, and she endorsed the winner, so don't be so mad, okay? Alright, now, here's the strength.
forward about, and honestly, not just Republicans, but Democrats who are beholden to donor money?
You know, look, it's that right now in Washington, money is everything. This is what I talk about in the book. This fight is our fight, as you know. I talk about the big arc of when America once worked for working people and how unions strengthened, how we built a middle class, how we created opportunity for kids like me, for kids that grew up in families that had nothing, and how that changes starting in 1980, going forward to 2017, and how it has been an America that has been filtered. Every decision in Washington gets filtered through how it affects the rich and the powerful. And that's because of the donor class. But I just want to add so much more. And that's what I talk about in the book. It's not just about donors. It's about the lobbyists, the armies of lobbyists that are there. It's about the bought and paid for experts. It's about the so-called think tanks that just churn out something that's churn out ideas that come exactly from the donor base. It's how money, I describe it at one point, how money slithers through Washington like a snake. And it is there at every point, and it's affecting every decision we make. And if we don't fight back, it truly will destroy our democracy.
So that's, of course, absolutely right. In 1980 is when the turn happens, partly because of Supreme Court decisions, Buckley v. Valeo and Bellotti in 78, where they say corporations have the speech rights to be able to, in essence, legally bribe politicians.
She's absolutely correct. So ever since the 80s, money, and 70s, you know, you can read this book, Rebooting the American Dream. I know the lighting's bad, but Rebooting the American Dream, 11 Ways to Rebuild Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. But one of the topics it discussed is how money has risen to basically create massive influence in Washington. Think tanks, lobbyists, interest groups, corporations, billionaires, etc., etc. It actually mentions how think tanks have been actively trying to rewrite history to get people to support policies, average everyday Americans. The Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute are the two most notorious ones. The Federalist Society is another. But that's where a lot of right-wingers get their talking points of, oh, cutting taxes will help everyone. Oh, the Reagan recession was actually an expansion. It may sound tinfoil hat-like, but it's true. I mean, money corrupts. And so I'm going to get back to that same segment of the interview because there's a weakness in her that I spotted. Now this next clip is Seth Meyers, where there's strength and a tiny weakness I noticed.
I feel as though the Democratic Party also has to answer for the large amounts of corporate money they've taken over the years. You don't take corporate PAC money, but do you think that the Democratic Party has to take a stronger stand against taking corporate money, or is that just the price of doing business?
So look, I've been worried for a very long time about the impact of money in Washington. You know, money just doesn't talk in Washington. It shouts, it screams, it commands. But let's never lose sight of the fact that the Trump administration is the most corrupt administration in our lifetime. We can't forget it. And think about example after example that right now the Saudis can funnel money directly, indirectly into Trump's pockets through the Trump Hotel. That the head of the Environmental Protection Agency is a coal lobbyist. And can I tell you about Gary Cohn?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, so here's the deal. So Trump is setting up Trump is setting up his administration. This is a year and a half ago. He's setting up his administration. He brings in all these Goldman Sachs guys. I swear to you, they could have opened a branch office of Goldman Sachs right there in the White House.
And it should be noted, this is the same Goldman Sachs that Donald Trump railed against Hillary Clinton for giving paid speeches to.
Exactly that one. Okay, so he brings in these Goldman Sachs people, but one of them was very special. Gary Cohn was a major executive at Goldman Sachs, and he is going to be the special advisor to the president, economic advisor, to help get the tax laws changed. So Goldman Sachs gives Gary Cohn a little gift on the way out, $1/3 of $1 billion. I think of it as a sort of pre-bribe. And then Gary Cohn goes off and writes the tax laws, helps ram them through Congress, and Goldman Sachs makes billions of dollars off the change in the tax laws. Let's call this out for what it is: corruption. Pure and simple.
Absolutely correct again. Now, she is right. The Trump administration is the most corrupt of my lifetime. And I was alive during the Bush administration. And I was born into the Clinton administration. But the weakness I saw is that she deflected when Democratic corruption was brought up. Now, as I mentioned, she railed against Obama for TPP. She railed against Obama for trying to put Wall Street guys in his administration. But I noticed how when concerns of Democratic corruption came up, she immediately went to, yes, that's a problem, but Trump is worse. Now, he is. I mean, there's no getting around it. But I think if she were to say, hey, look, this is terrible, the Democratic Party really needs to resolve this, I'd give that clip my full approval. Now, this isn't Trump derangement syndrome. The guy's awful. I mean, if it weren't for George W. Bush, he'd be the worst president of my lifetime. But now, there's a weakness I noticed from TYT interviews, going back to them.
It's easy for me to point that out, and it's easy for me to criticize Republicans and Democrats on that issue. And you mentioned think tanks. Center for American Progress, you've spoken there, is a Democratic think tank. Third Way has attacked you as a so-called centrist think tank, but I think they're wolf in sheep's clothing that pretend to be on the left, but are in fact work completely for corporations. Third Way is a little easier for you. Center for American Progress is a little harder for you, since you've spoken there, and I'm sure you have friends there. And it's easy for me, not as easy for you. You're a Democratic senator. Joe Manchin, I think, is another guy who works almost completely for his donors. Easy for me to say, not so easy for you to say. So how do you balance collegiality and working together with Democratic colleagues and some of the realities you know about their donor base, or if you're going to be charitable, your differences of opinion?
So look, for me, this is not about collegiality. I just want to be blunt. I'm not running for Miss Popularity. That ship sailed a long time ago. But for me, what this is really about is fighting for the same set of issues I came to the United States Senate to fight for. I came to politics very late in life. I thought I'd spend my whole life as a teacher and a researcher. And what I kept watching is what was happening to America's middle class, what was happening to working families, what was happening to the poor, what was happening to opportunity in America. I'll work with anyone who will help us expand opportunity again. And I want to make a spirited defense that there are folks like Joe Manchin. He works hard on issues that affect working people in West Virginia. He rounded up the whole Democratic caucus, and I give him complete credit for this, to get the U.S. government to move in and make good on the miners' health insurance. These were people who are going to be kicked off their health insurance, people whose lives have been wrecked from years of working in the mines. And when we can get together on student loans, when we can get together on Social Security, expanding Social Security instead of contracting it, when we can get together on the issues that affect the economic well-being of hardworking people in this country, then by golly, I'm going to do it.
So the first part I thought was okay. She did pretty good. You know, she's not in it for popularity. Good. Well, this was 2017 before she announced she was running, but she's not in politics for popularity. That's good. But then when she defends Joe Manchin, now what she said about him is mostly true. I mean, he actually did what she said he did. But Joe Manchin, I mean, face reality, he's a puppet to his donors. So is Claire McCaskill. I don't know if Missouri's that distant from I live on the Kansas-Missouri border. I was born in Missouri. I grew up in Kansas. I should say, I'm growing up in Kansas. I'm a college student working at a nearby pizza place. So I'm not some doofus living in his bedroom. Okay. I'm trying to move out of here. As soon as I get my degree, I'm looking into politics as a profession. So bear with me. But moving on. Jenkins addressed an actual legitimate concern of Joe Manchin's. You know, he's voted with the coal and fossil fuel lobby almost entirely. I mean, he voted with Republicans 67% of the time. He's the highest voting record Democrat who voted the most with Republicans in the Senate, I think. Feinstein, Donnelly, Kane, and McCaskill are up there, but he voted with them the most. He voted with them on Kavanaugh. I mean, Joe Manchin is a Republican claiming to be a Democrat. So are many of them. Clinton, Obama. Obama's like beta. Ooh, he'll talk a good progressive game, but then govern as a neoliberal corporatist. But that's the establishment's guy. It's him or Kamala or Biden. I don't know if Corey is up there because I think Corey has dug himself a hole. Next clip is another weakness, but there is some strength to her response. It's about Yemen, and it's also Seth Meyers.
You mentioned the Saudis. I also want to ask about this because I feel like we tend to get so focused on what's happening in D.C. and what's specifically happening with this presidency. You wrote a letter today, I believe, to the commander of Central Command about this horrific bombing in Yemen, bombing that killed civilians, killed children. This is Saudi, this is the UAE, but it is U.S. backed in that munitions, in that refueling and intelligence. Can you explain a little about what you asked for in that letter?
Sure. So this is an unfolding humanitarian crisis. And the United States is not dropping bombs, but it is helping the Saudis with arms, it's helping the Saudis with refueling, and it now appears it's helping the Saudis target and pinpoint. I think that if the United States is going to be that directly involved in a humanitarian crisis, then the American people have a right to know exactly what's going on.
I agree with you, and I'm very glad that you asked that question. Hopefully we'll get answers. My last question.
Well, that solves the lighting problem. I mean, my desk blocks out the light. But at least you can see my face. You can see that a little bit better. Okay. Moving on. Now, she is correct. What's happening in Yemen is horrific, and that the people have a right to know. And she's correct about how much the U.S. is involved. We're arming the Saudis and the UAE. We're providing them intelligence and whatnot. Now, we do have ground forces in Yemen, but they're not partaking in the war itself. They're fighting Al-Qaeda now. I mean, take it what it is. Saudi Arabia backs Al Qaeda. But, you know, the U.S. isn't that directly involved. The American people should have a right to know. I wrote an entire paper on this in my World Regional Geography class, outlining what the Saudis do and how it got started. I also wrote about the U.S. involvement, spent most of the paper, because this was the guideline for the project, on what the Saudis are doing and how it got started and the details of the conflict. Then I spent a little bit on the U.S. involvement, because the guideline was it can't be about U.S. or Europe or Australia alien conflicts. So I wrote about it. It's horrific, and we should get out of all of our wars in the Middle East, our proxy wars. We should only fight. If a country attacks us, then we attack back. But that's if a country. None of these countries we're at war with have attacked us. We were attacked by a terrorist group that was based in Afghanistan, but the Afghanistani government offered to hand over Osama bin Laden, and we decided to go to war with them, and we decided to go to war with Iraq. But we haven't gone to war with Saudi Arabia. They back ISIS, they back Al Qaeda, they back the Taliban. Okay, moving on to talk about the weakness I saw here. So, her saying the American people have a right to know, and that the U.S. is partaking in something this horrific. She's absolutely right. Okay. The weakness is that she didn't immediately say, we need to get the hell out of there. Now, she wants us to get out of there. She voted for Bernie's measure in the Senate to pull us out, to withdraw all aid to Saudi Arabia. But I think that since this technically started with the Obama administration, she does not want to, what I call, be seen as a needless critic of the Dems. I think she wants to focus on, in this instance, what's going on now, not history behind it. So I think her response was weak, but given how she's voted in the Senate in regards to this issue, she wants us to get out. So overall, I like her. If Bernie doesn't run, I will vote for her in the primaries. If she wins the primary fairly, I will vote for her in the general election. I have a feeling I'll probably be voting for her if she wins regardless. Probably should. I'll think about that part, but Donald Trump is a flight risk I do not want to take. But I do live in the deep red state of Kansas, which gave us 2 terms of Brownback. And Trump had a 97% chance of winning in Kansas. Now, back in 2016, I was a libertarian. I voted for Gary Johnson, which probably handed my district over to Hillary Clinton. I live in the one district Hillary won. She won it by a point. Yes, I live in the bluest district in Kansas. My state level district is bluer than my national district. It recently turned blue this election, so I'm happy. I hope Sharice Davis does a good job. I was a voter in the primary. I voted for her in the general. Okay, moving on. Overall, I like Elizabeth Warren. Now, some right-wingers are going to go, oh, but she's lied about her Native American, her being Native American. Oh, she never claimed to be Native American. She claimed that she had Native American heritage, that her ancestors were Native American, or that she had a Native American ancestor. The DNA test proved her right. Now, people go, 1 in 1,024, blah, blah, blah. That's a ratio. 1/60th to 120, 1,000 1,024th. That's a ratio. 1,024th is the lowest common ratio, and 1/60th is the highest. I do think it was a poor decision to take Trump's bait, but at the same time, she also called him out on his bluff, because her DNA proved that she did have a Native American ancestor. Now, she inherited this much of her DNA, and I think the squabble over how much Native American DNA she inherited is ridiculous, dumb, and a waste of energy. And it also shows that right-wingers have nowhere else to go but to attack her for her Native American heritage, having a Native American great-great-grandmother, not making her a full-blown Native American. Ultimately, to me, what's more important is policy. And the right really doesn't have anything on her policy. So there you have it. If you want me to talk more about this, let me know in the comment section below. And be sure to like, share, subscribe. And I will see you next time.